Alrighty, hello everyone, and welcome to another Saturday scripting event. My name is Tree. I'll be your host today. We ended off our last session with talk about the workshop and file patching and sim linking, and we're going to start off today diving into that a little more and understanding how we can get it all connected and working together so that we can build UIs and edit layout files and eventually just use the full benefits that workshop, the DayZ workshop or Workbench, gives you. And so we're going to go ahead and open up our little tutorial readme, and I'm going to open up this here. There we go. Okay, so sim linking. The too long didn't read version of sim linking is it's a way of identifying a source folder or target and allowing it to be placed in any destination you want. And this is useful for us because as developers or as modders, we really only want to write code or configs once. Anytime we have to duplicate stuff and like copy and paste and move it around creates extra overhead. It is extra steps in our workflow or process, and it just ultimately is an extra step for us to fail or cause problems at. And so, there was a server request help earlier about somebody asking, how do I set up my DayZ workflow? This is going to be kind of touching on that. So first off, I'm going to showcase and prove and really highlight the fact that it doesn't really matter where your source is. All right, so the files that you're going to modify, they can live anywhere. And so I'm just going to create a folder on my desktop. This is technically not best practice, and I wouldn't recommend it, but this is to prove a point that the power of sim linking and how we can use it to our advantage. So I'm going to make a new folder. I'm going to call it, my mods. Actually, I'm going to say my test mod. Okay, and it is on my desktop, my C drive. It could be in your Z drive, D drive, whatever you want. But I'm going to take this folder and I'm going to dump it into my P drive. And I'm going to do that using symlinks. And so if we take the syntax of what a symlink is in Windows, you have this mk link, make link. That's the command. The /j, which represents the juncture option. You don't really need to know why I'm using that. You just need to know that it works for this purpose. If you want to know more, you can always Google it. And we have our destination. So where is the mod where does this symlinked folder going to exist? And then the source. What are the files that we're going to actually be symlinking to this place? And so an example of that would be mklink or makelink /j p drive and first mod. In this case, I'm going to just duplicate this. And instead of p first mod, it's going to be p my test mod, because I want it to be the same name as my folder here, just to keep things easy so I don't have to remember two folder names. It's only one folder name. And I'm going to get its file location. There we go, sorry. Get the file location by just opening up an Explorer, grabbing the path from up here, and I'll copy and paste it. Okay. And so right now I have basically a command which I can run that will take this folder on my desktop and link it to my P drive under the same folder. So I've named it the same. And so I will assume that people that are listening to this video and are on the call have the DayZ folders extracted, they have DayZ tools open and can navigate to their P drive. So we'll go ahead and check out the P drive. And at the moment, if I look for my test mod, it doesn't exist. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this command, copy the contents on the inside, and I'm going to open a terminal. So if you had installed VS Code earlier in our previous video, in the Foundations video, you can press Control tilde, and tilde is the key underneath your escape. Or you can go to terminal, new terminal up here. Okay, and then you would paste that into there, and then you would just enter. Uh-oh. Oh, I'm in PowerShell. Duh. I need to open a command prompt. It's my bad. I am sorry for that. Control C, you gotta right click to paste. And so for those that are on the video and those that are here, if you run into this issue, Windows has a runtime environment that they have their own scripting language called PowerShell, and it's integrated into this terminal. So I haven't changed my terminal to use anything but PowerShell because I've been using this lately. So again, to get around this issue, you just go to Windows button, type CMD, and a command prompt will open up, right? And you just saw the fact that I just right-clicked paste, and it dumped the command in there, and I was able to enter it. And if you try to run it more than once, it'll tell you, oh, you can't create that file because it already exists. So if I go to my P drive and I refresh it, and I'm looking for my test mod, you'll see that my test mod exists right here. And that's because I symlinked it to the one on my desktop. And, you know, since this is a virtual kind of connection or file path, I can delete this as many times as I want inside my P drive, and my source files are unaffected. You can see on my desktop that folder is still there. And I can rerun the command and recreate the junction. So this is really useful for moving a folder around without actually moving it, okay? And this is a fundamental concept that we'll be using for file patching or Workbench. So if you don't understand what I just went over, at least for the video, you can pause, go back, and rewatch what I did there. And if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand in chat, and you can ask a very specific question. Okay. Now that I got this linked to my P drive, okay, I'm also gonna want to link it to my workshop folder, my Workbench folder, excuse me, and that is located in your DayZ folder. So if you go to, if you've ever navigated inside of your DayZ folder and scroll down, you'll notice that the game that is actually run when you launch the game is right here, DayZ_x64.exe. If you use the DZSA launcher, you most likely have had to point that launcher to this exe so that it can launch the game. All right. Now, what you'll observe is that if you look below it, there's DayZ diag x64, and this is what you will use to connect to Workbench and do file patching and debugging, okay? And this is a special build of the game that includes the server and the client, and so we will build a script to launch the diag mode and server mode, and then we'll also use a script to launch the diag exe in client mode so that we can connect to that server. Let's go ahead and work on getting this all set up. And just in case we move too fast, there is a way to derive all of this, okay, from the Modding Basics webpage. Okay. So if you're ever lost or stuck or like wondering how do you actually make a mod, this webpage is kind of the basics of what you need to do and what we're going to go through today. So, you know, make a simple mod that prints a message into the script log whenever the player jumps. In order to do this, right, we'll need to create the folder structure of the mod. We'll need to pack it into a PBO. We know that mods can contain several PBOs, but most smaller mods will only ever need one, right? So we'll need DayZ standalone, we'll need DayZ tools. I'm assuming you all have these. So create the project drive. Most of you have already extracted the game data. If you haven't, rewatch scripting fundamentals. Okay, so what do we fill this folder up with? Okay, so first we have a folder that houses the mod namesake. I've created my test mod. And it's important to note that this folder is considered the root prefix of the mod. All right, and you will hear me say that fairly often, the root prefix, and that just refers to the folder that is the parent, the highest level the one folder to rule them all. There are no folders outside of this other than DayZ itself. All right, in this case, our root folder is my test mod. Very simple. Within that folder, we're going to create another folder called scripts. Okay, so I'll open it up. If you don't have this thing up here, you probably need to like open your properties or something, but you can always just right click, new folder. I'm assuming people don't know a lot, so I'm kind of going over some basics. And we're going to rename this file scripts, folder scripts. Okay. And then we're going to go inside of it and we're going to create another folder called world. _world. And if you've unpacked the base game data, I'm going to kind of go here. You'll see that we are mirroring that same sort of structure. I'd have to open that up, but scripts or world, right? Okay. And then we'll need to create the mod configuration. The config CPP is what sort of defines the mod itself. It's the metadata involved in letting the game know that A, your mod exists, and B, where does it need to go to actually pull these files? And this is a newbie mistake right here, or an amateur, rookie, or new modder mistake, is forgetting these defs for your scripts. And so very often you'll see in the scripters channel, hey, I've written a script and I go into game and my retexture works of my item. I can see it in game, but it's not doing anything that I scripted. And usually our first answer is, hey, put some gibberish into the code and see if it actually still runs. And the game will run because the scripts aren't actually being loaded, and so there are no compile errors. And so this right here is very important to ensure that your scripts are loaded. So I'm gonna go and copy this template right here. And inside of world, I'm gonna create a new text document, and I'm gonna just rename the whole thing to config.cpp. Am I sure I want to change the extension? Yes, I am sure. All right, so now I have a config CPP, and at this point I need to edit the file, and I personally hate like dealing in File Explorer and just Notepad, and so I'm gonna go and close this, and I'm gonna open my folder. If you followed the scripting fundamentals video, you would have this option here to just right click any folder and open with code. So now I can kind of see it in this view, which makes it a little easier for me. So I have it copied. I'll paste what I copied here. And so first things first, we want to make sure that the name of our mod or the patch or the add-on, those are all interchangeable, matches my root folder. And you might say, Tree, what is our root folder? Well, it's the root prefix, the one that we chose at the very beginning, my test mod. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to change all these values. And so if you're using VS Code, Control D will select the same thing, kind of like find all and select, and then you can paste where you want it. So I'll go ahead and Control Z so that you can see me do it manually. But at this point, I basically have a patch, which this is what defines what my add-on is. If another modder wanted to override my mods or add something to it, this patch name is what they would use for their required add-ons. And this is important for load order, and we'll get onto that later. But it's important that this name is unique, and it's unique across all mods. So that's usually why a lot of us have any modder that has more than one mod or a couple mods. Like for me, they'll have a prefix that is unique to our name. So for IAT, it's a tree. For Genry, it could be GT or, the name of the mod. Or, it could be whatever. It's just as long as it makes it unique. And same thing with the CFG mods. If I wanted to override someone else's scripts, this is a way to ensure that their scripts are loaded before mine. That way I can override the hierarchy and ensure the call chain is correct. And it's just good convention, in my opinion, to keep them named the same, because if I require this patch or this add-on, it'll automatically require this one. And so you kind of keep your config and your scripts together. So that's a little architecture for you. But now that we've got it pasted in here, I'm going to make sure that my file path is correct. My test mod, scripts, for world. Some of you might ask, well, Tree, does casing matter. You have an uppercase scripts in your file path, you have a lowercase script in your actual folder. And my answer to that is, since we are on Windows, the casing doesn't matter. However, if you're like a professional coder or trying to learn like good practices, in my opinion, it's always best to match what you have. And it's always, in my opinion, best to have lowercase, because sometimes this stuff runs on Linux, and Linux is case sensitive. So that can be a gotcha in some cases. And I know DayZ is trying to get Linux support, which that becomes a concern as you get into more advanced scripting. Okay, so we have copied and pasted this config, this template. We can read up more on the PBO structure of a mod and sort of what does a full thing look. And so we compare. Right, I have a very basic form of this, but I can add in inputs. So if I wanted to have hotkeys, I would add inputs and I'd have an XML to define that. If I was adding new animations, I would have a skeleton definition for maybe like a custom animal. So some of the mods that you see out there that are like the stalker ports or some of the weird looking creatures that don't have vanilla animations, this is how they're like piping that data into the game. The dependencies tell and flag the game what we need to bring, and this is it's optional. Interesting. We'll have a play with that, because normally if you've seen other people, they have this here. Actually, since I have 4 world, they would have dependencies here. So when we'll test on this video here, if you actually do need this, the docs say it's optional. So if it's optional, I will probably get rid of that in all my mods. Image sets. If you're going to add new image sets like icon slots, this is how you would do it. You would make an image set inside of Workbench, and then you would connect it through here through this. And that way you could then refer to it as image set : icon name. Widget styles. So this would be for like your GUIs and making them look and feel differently and giving people a theme to swap between. So some modders, and I know there are some paid mods out there that touch on this, and it's a very simple thing to do, which I'm hoping to sort of shed light on the fact of like how simple it is to make your own theme or style and sort of get away from that paid mod stuff. And then lastly, we have the script modules that you can override. Most people don't even touch one core in GameLib. You can override them if you want, and you can touch them if you'd like and make your own. But most of us stay within the game script module, the world script module, and mission script. And these are required for if you touch those various domains. So we will add these as we go. I normally don't include them all at once. Okay. And then if you ever wanted to give your mod like a picture on the workshop or show up in the main menu when players are like in the game, there is this stuff over here that you would put in a mod CPP in the base folder. So I would come in here, I'd say mod.cpp, make sure it's all the way out. Yeah. And I would just copy all this, and then I would change it to what I wanted and make sure that I had like TGAs. Actually, I usually put PAs in here. I wouldn't have the raw TGA. But it's okay if the paths don't exist. It's not going to error out. Okay, back to the main basics. DayZ has 5 script modules that can be modded in order that they load. Their engine script, right? We went over this. Why is that? Using the correct script module is very important. Your scripts basically won't load if you don't have these. Oh, Solomon asked the question, what's the difference between the 5? Okay, that's actually a really good question. When we talk about the various levels, so like why would the devs even break the game up into 5 distinct parts like this? And the answer is, if you watch the first video with basically the 4 pillars of object-oriented programming, you have this notion of encapsulation and polymorphism and inheritance and abstraction. And in reality, devs are incredibly lazy to the point of peak efficiency. And so what I mean by that is we don't want to write the same thing twice And if we see that two things are doing sort of similar stuff, we will try to group them together so that we're only dealing with one thing that kind of does two things. So they organize the game into core components that are then used to build like a game library. So core components would be like file IO. I can read a file, I can write a file, I can allocate memory, I have data types, things like that. Stuff that you and I don't really concern ourselves with. This is deep down engine level stuff that most of us don't concern ourselves with. Then there's the notion of I use those component parts to build what we would call a game library, or like foundational functions for a game. So things like the object that needs to be, that's turned into an entity AI. That would be sort of game defined in the game lib. There'd be like the renderer would be built in here, the game loop stuff, the guts of that would be in here. And then you would go one step further, which is kind of where it gets into our realm, which is the actual game. So like the AI, the actual expression of an AI moving across the terrain, or an entity that has quantity and health and stuff. It actually does something at this point. And then the world is like, how does that interact with the actual world and players? Like, how do they collaborate together? So things like the plugin system of agents and sicknesses. That's kind of, the base classes are all kind of set up in 3 game, and then 4 world sort of expresses them. And then lastly, 5 mission is all about like the player and how do you wrap a world into a discrete unit and serve it up to a player and run it on a server. And so in this case, mission deals heavily with GUI, graphical user interface. And in reality, if you think of DayZ as like a port from Arma, you could technically have a standalone quote unquote mission like Arma had them. All that functionality is still here. And that's why it's named mission, because technically you could have, 3-hour run thing that runs its duration, it ends, and then everything gets reset back to the beginning. And so that's why it kind of mirrors this form. Okay. Oh, another important thing is you can go down the stack. So 5 mission can access everything above it. And so this is an important part of the inheritance. I only inherit my parents' stuff. Parents don't inherit children's stuff. So 1_core hasn't inherited anything from mission. So it can't touch anything from mission. It actually hasn't inherited anything from GameLib. So when I'm above here, I can't like touch down. But when I'm below, I can look up and be like, what are my parents doing? And that's why we usually have inheritances. So that's an important thing too. So you'll hear people, that's why the initc coding is very popular, because in 5 mission, you have access to everything. And it's kind of a two-edged sword, because you can get yourself into a lot of trouble. It's not flexible. So you'll hear people be like, I've done all of this stuff, but then I want to do this one hyper-specific thing. And it kind of breaks because there's no like event interaction at this point. It's all GUI and server stuff. So you got to work around it all. And when we're doing our scripts, Solomon says, when we're doing our scripts, we basically just tell paths. We could just have scripts into a single file, or it matters to have categories as a file. Oh yeah. Good question. So the way I understood that question is, why does the scripts folder, even my scripts, have all these folders? Do I need to have them all in individual config C files or script C files? And the answer to that is no. You could technically have these all in one folder and in a single file. I think a max file limit is 4,096 lines is the maxed script file. So you can only have 4,096 lines. So that's a hard cap on script files. So the game has to load the script file, and I assume that's to keep it under what, 4 megs or something like that, or however long. But I discovered that when I was trying to load items into the map, I pulled all the P3Ds in the DayZ folder, I put them in a loop essentially to spawn them all in my mission file, and it didn't work. And you'll notice that DayZ editor is able to spawn thousands and thousands of items from a file. And you might ask yourselves, well, how can they spawn more than 4,096 lines? And that's because they've built it into a config and they're reading it line by line. And that's the way to get around it. So I guess the cleanest answer to that question is you want to keep things in independent files, because these names, or what I would call objects, are meaningful. A crossbow is not an arrow, so why would they be in the same file? A crossbow is not a house, so why would you keep them in the same file? Keep them separated, because when you're mentally thinking about the project, it will cause like undue mental overhead. You'll have to think about more things than you need to. And so I'm always like I personally mirror a vanilla, because if I'm looking for something and I Control-Shift-F through my DayZ projects folder, I can easily go back and forth with my own scripts. And so I mirror it just because it's easy to think about. Okay. Okay, so long story short, we have this config, we have our config set up, we have our scripts folder set up. Now, even though this mod doesn't do anything, we want to pack it, all right? And this is another like pitfall of a new developer or a new modder, is that they don't do things in small chunks. And so you might be like, Tree, why don't we add the functionality further down where it actually does the printing on jump and then pack it? And I would then answer, well, what if you made a mistake in this copy paste? You wouldn't know until the end, and you would think that your problem was with the code that you copied and not the config. And so one of the hallmarks of a successful developer is being able to confine your work into small, discrete, testable chunks. And so these people want me to use add-on builder. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to use a PBO project. And so this kind of gets into the primary source. Like, since I've sim linked my folder to my P drive, I can go to P and I would see, oh, here, my test mod is right there. Sweet. Where do I want to output this? Inside of my P folder, P drive folder, I have a folder called mods, which I dump all of my output to. In my opinion, this is the best way to do it. Some people put it directly in their P drive, and in my opinion, that's not good organization, and it will clutter. It'll essentially double your P drive, which that can cause issues. And if you're using add-on builder, it will essentially doubles the scan time. So make a mods folder, and then you make a another folder. Usually the convention is the @ sign and then your root prefix. So my test mod. All right, I select that folder. Cool. Crunch. Looks like Macaro's packed it. All right, we're good to go. You could use that. Actually, you know what? For sake of the video, we're gonna use add-on builder. All right. As much as I'm not liking that. So it follows the same flow. Okay. The first thing it wants me to put in is the add-on source directory. So I'm gonna go look in my P drive for the add-on source directory. It's gonna be P minus test mod. Where do I want to dump the add-on to? So it's going to be P mods, my test mod, and then the add-ons folder. That's where I wanted to put the PBO. You can always hint to the add-on builder that your prefix is your root mod, right? Sign it. Look in options. Check the options, make sure that everything's set up right. In my case, right, path to project folder. Some people just put this to P drive. If you put this to the P drive, it'll scan the whole thing. And so I usually come in here and I will deliberately pick the folder that I want, which is P my test mod. Okay. This is another gotcha right here. That'll get you. Usually you don't have to change this stuff up here. All right, pack. Build successful. All right, so we're packing Macaros, we're packing an add-on builder. We're good to go. we have copied our config correctly. Now we're getting into file patching. So we want to ensure that our scripts that we've just written here are available to the diag version of the game, okay? And to do that, we're gonna use symlinking because we don't wanna have to write our scripts twice. We don't wanna have to copy and paste our mod source folder into the DayZ folder. Gross, disgusting. I have to do that every time I make a change. Are you kidding me? Like, what? So we're gonna symlink our source folder to the DayZ installation folder, okay? And so from here, I'm just gonna copy and paste this thing that it tells me as a template. In this case, you don't even need to know what it does, but I'm gonna paste it down here in my examples. Okay. You notice I kind of have something similar because I was showcasing that last time. Okay, and so I'm gonna copy and paste this again. That way I have a template. So I'm gonna make link, where is my DayZ installation folder? So I'm gonna go to Steam. My DayZ installation folder is this. Yours is probably different. You might have it installed in C drive. I keep mine off in a different drive. So I'm going to copy or double click this icon here or this text. I'm going to delete it and I'm going to replace it with file path and then the name of my root mod, which is my test mod. Okay. And the source is going to be this folder here on my desktop. Okay. So if I go to my DayZ folder, you'll see that I already have a bunch of other things that are symlinked because I've been using it recently, but you'll notice that my test mod isn't here yet. However, I'll go and copy my script that I created, right? Make link, the DayZ installation destination, and then the file path that I want to link, my source directory. I'm gonna open up command, CMD. Just gonna right click it, paste, enter. It's created the junction. So now this folder on my desktop is linked to this folder in my DayZ installation. And so now I can change my source as much as I want without having to copy and paste over. And this will save you so much time in the future, okay? So we just did this step right here. Created a junction to our DayZ installation folder from our source. And for sake of those that are watching the video, this is using the P drive as your source destination. And in my opinion, it makes sense to put everything in the P drive, because source in the P drive, because that's where the DayZ files are. And as you're opening the P drive with VS Code, you have search capabilities across all folders. I'm just purely showcasing that symlinking works no matter where you put the file. Okay, so let's move on and actually creating our first script, okay? Probably one of the hardest steps for a new modder is, where do I put this code, right? So I have these folders here, like where the heck do I put this crap, right? So my answer to that is always mirror vanilla. Like, just save yourself the trouble and find out where things in vanilla exist and add them there. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna close this and I'm gonna open my P drive in VS Code. Okay. And the reason I'm gonna do that is because since I have this source folder linked to my P drive, okay, it's here, right here. And so I can do everything I wanna do, search all of base DayZ files and modify my stuff. And so if I open up this, it wants me to mod player base. And if I've never done this before, you might ask, well, where do I put this file? Well, I would then say Control-Shift-F inside of your VS Code and type class player base. Type it correctly, unlike me. Okay, you're gonna search down the line. You'll probably have fewer searches, but eventually you'll see class player base, which is a comment, so that's not useful to us. Class player base right here, which is a definition of what we want, and then another one here, which is class player base client. That doesn't match our term exactly, so I'm going to ignore it. So we're going to go back to this one and drag it over to this folder. Okay. And if I look up here, this shows me the file path that it's under. And so I'm going to go back to my scripts and I'm going to see, okay, for world, I'm going to right click, new folder, entities, right click, new folder, man base, and then right click, new file. And then I say modded player base.c. And this is just my personal convention because when you open Workbench, it's going to load all this stuff. And I personally want my modded player base content next to the vanilla player base, so I'm not having to click up and down the hierarchy, because you'll notice it's pretty arduous to do. It's not like as straightforward as what I'm doing here. Okay, so that's where the file is located. Let's go ahead and copy paste the file contents. Control C, Control V. All right, let's deconstruct what we've done here. Modded is a keyword to mod an existing class. You have to do this. If there is an existing class name, you cannot just write class player base. If you pack this up and try to run it, it's going to say duplicate class defined. And you're going to be like, you're going to come into the scripting channel and be like, why is my code not working? And we're going to ask for the error code because you probably haven't provided it. And then we're going to say, oh, you have 2 class player bases defined. Just put modded in front of the one you're changing. And that will fix that. Also, don't ever, if you're extending a class, don't ever put, if you're modding a class, don't ever put extends then the inheritance. You don't need to provide that when you're modding, and you can actually cause lots of issues if you do. So just as a rule of thumb, if you're modding a class, it should look clean. If you're making a new one, then you can inherit whatever you want. Okay, moving on. Override. Override is the same thing as modded, but for functions. We use it to tell the compiler that we are changing behavior that exists already. And so in this case, on jump start is when the player begins to jump. And we are basically overriding this function so that we can hook into the base DayZ game files or the runtime loop or whatever you want to consider it. And this is an important consideration for scripting in general, is when you want to actually do something to the game, you first really have to think about, how will I get DayZ to trigger my stuff? And events are a really good place to start because they're naturally exposed by the developers for you to hook into. In this case, onJump is exposed to us, and we can kind of intuit from the name that it's a function when the player starts to jump. Not all functions are as intuitive, but as you get more familiar with the code, you'll begin to learn like where you can and can't call code. Actions are another really good place to call code because you can create the trigger through the action condition. Whether you're looking at a target, whether there's something in your hands, whether it's a specific item in your hands or a specific target with a quantity, and then like the onFinish complete or onFinish server stuff allows you to like trigger your code. And so that's a important consideration here. Moving on, super, we touched on it last on the fundamentals. Super calls the existing call stack. So if we were to look at how vanilla uses onJumpStart, since we're overriding something that already exists, I'm going to look here at what vanilla does. And it looks like vanilla itself is overriding onJumpStart. And when the player jumps, it says action manager, do some work. Looks like it aborts a weapon event. Looks like it delays an animation refresh state. I'm not sure what that does. Requests hand animation state refresh. Not sure what that does at the moment. And then it closes the map. And so if we keep going further down, so I'm going to Control-Shift-F on that search term to bring up where it's used elsewhere in the code. And so if I look in DayZ player implement, which is something that a player base uses, you'll see that it's a void. And so this is where it's created, or where jump is defined. And so when, let's see, action manager server. Okay, so when action manager server calls onJumpStart, okay, its parent is calling this empty function more or less. So there's nothing happening. So when we call super, we can assume that nothing happens. And that's probably why they don't call super here. Either that or they don't care about existing behavior. It's one of the other two considerations. Okay. So this calls on jumpstart. The action manager starts something. Okay. And then player manager, doing the player base, will then do the jumpstart. And then my code will run. Okay. That's what super does. Super will jump into the whatever is inherited or whatever we're modding first, call that behavior, and then if super is continued to be called, then that chain will continue until the very last parent call happens. Okay. This is kind of the call stack is kind of a complex subject if you're new into scripting. Really, all you need to think about is a pyramid. As you're entering the calls, they stack on top of each other, and you can't remove the bottom stack. You have to like remove the top stuff first. It's like that Towers of Hanoi puzzle. And so that's kind of why super is important. Now, if I wanted to call my code first, then vanilla, we would put our code first. And so we're actually going to demonstrate that I'm just going to put a print here. Before super, after super. And it might not be novel prints because something in between on jumpstart isn't doing anything, but you know, it's just showing that you can do code before and after, and it doesn't really matter other than the order of your code calls, which now that does matter, and that just depends on your use case. So, all right. Let's see, what is this tutorial telling us to do now? Put this in here. Make sure you always test your mod before releasing to the public. Okay, cool. So let's pack this. First off, let's make sure this is packable. Gotta reset the source. And then the output. We're getting close to Workbench, guys. I know. It takes a while. Okay, so we have our mod. Now, we need to test our mod, okay? So we get into again, another very common pitfall for a new modder, which is how do I run my own test server locally? Whether you run your code before or after super matters in non-void functions. Yes. Definitely not in this printing case, but absolutely if I was modifying state in here, 100%. That's a good call out. Okay, yeah. So yeah, creating our own test server to start things up. And so we're going to use Chernurus because I won't expect anyone to have anything other than that downloaded. So let's see, what does this thing say to do? Within my DayZ installation folder, if it doesn't exist, create a new folder called missions. Okay. Oh, that's right. We're setting up our normally we would do this in the DayZ server folder, but since we're using our diag mode, we basically got to put the missions into DayZ. And so you can go into your DayZ server folder and you can find the missions folder in there already, and you can just copy Chernurus into MP missions into the DayZ folder. If it doesn't exist, just make it. Just create it. It's no big deal. This will say create a folder called first mission. We usually just say empty. And that's because most DayZ doesn't use the mission mechanism that exists that can like transition between one mission to another. Technically that's existing. Like you could go from deathmatch to RDM to PvE to RDM to deathmatch and have like rules overarching all those. But we just don't do it. And you know, either that or it's like a paid mod, and none of us have really ever built. That's an advanced thing, and none of the advanced scripters have like really built that because it doesn't really seem like there's a need for it or a want yet. All right. And we'll go into MP missions. Turner's Plus. I've copied and pasted that. Within the newly created mission, create the entry point script init-c. Okay, so inside of MP missions, inside of Turner's Plus, there's an init-c. I'm going to open that with code, VS Code, and you'll notice, if you notice, this code doesn't look anything like any code we've really written. This void main thing, like this is new, and if you're a developer, like you recognize, oh, okay, this is like C++, but this, I'm gonna go ahead and collapse that for now, because this looks much closer to what we're used to. Mission server, that feels safe. Okay, cool. Okay, I'm collapsing this because I've changed mine up a little bit. I'm trying to see what the difference is here. And so if we look at how to create a mission, this is returning like churner specific stuff. If you understand the inheritance of mission server, this is how you actually can create a new server. And so if I'm gonna Control Shift F this and look across DayZ files, I'm gonna put class in front of it to bound my search a little bit. You'll notice I personally override mission server a lot because this is a good hook into when the server starts. And so it has a lot of stuff like players, the dead players logging out, a lot of things. It's what defines the beginning of a mission. Okay. And so if you wanted your own mission server, like I'm doing here, I'm making my own custom mission. I'm inheriting from the mission server, something that DayZ knows how to run. And I am going to be overriding a few specific things like creating a character. Okay? Create character is something that mission server gives us. It's when the player character gets created. The starting equipment setup. This is another place where you can, this is another thing that's exposed in mission server. When the player is getting their equipment, when they spawn, this is an easy way to programmatically set up things. Okay. In this case, I've set it to give like a chem light and randomize a bunch of stuff based on an array. In reality, we can just, you can see that it's doing everything in main. You can do that. And for purposes of this, I'm going to I don't like that. We're going to do it just for the video's sake, just so that everything we do is one-to-one with the documentation. Okay. I'm going to comment out my old stuff. I'm going to paste it in here. Let's see if this works. I'm doing it live. And if I'm going to read what this is doing, we're creating a new custom mission. We're just returning the existing mission gameplay that DayZ has. When the main function runs, we create a player called Linda at this position. No orientation, no flags. We spawn a shirt. We take the player that we've created up here, this variable. We get its inventory, and we create a shirt in the inventory. And so this is how you like attach stuff to a player. And then this would be how you put an item inside of another item. In this case, the item is working boots, and then we take the item, we get its inventory, and we create an apple inside of the boots. So this is kind of like how you would like give a bandage to somebody, or say like if this was a rag, you'd say item.set cleanliness 1, and that's how you would set it disinfected. That was a question in scripters just recently. Like, how would I set a bandage to be clean? But this is how you do it inside of the init-c. Okay, we have that set up. Now command lines. So anytime the game starts saying like, hey, you should you should do like command line stuff. In my opinion, this is I should build a script for this. I should like make a file that represents this thing so I don't have to copy and paste this all the time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go inside of my folder, my test mod folder. Okay, and I'm going to do new file, start server.bat. All right, something simple. So I don't want to have to keep copy and pasting this. I think this is another pitfall of a new developer, always coming back and copy and pasting. Like if you just make a script, you never have to do that again. So my DayZ installation folder, let's go find that. DayZ. Okay, it already has the exe put in for me. What are the mods that I want to load? And so let's go back to my P drive. I go into my mod folder. I have P mods, my test mod. So I'm going to grab that full file path right there. And if you notice, it's basically following the same convention. And then it asks me what mission do I want. And this is assuming my start server file is inside of my... Well, that's actually a good shout. This script itself is assuming that it's inside of the DayZ folder. And in my opinion, I don't like that. That hard codes things a little bit, or I shouldn't say hard codes, but it makes me have to remember why it's there. And so I'm going to come back here. I'm going to go to the DayZ folder. I'm going to go to NP missions. And I'm going to copy that whole line and I'm going to replace this whole thing. That way it's like pointing directly to the file. Okay. And I'm suspicious that this is going to yell at me saying, I don't know where that is. So let's try and run this real quick. If I go to my P drive, if I go to my test mod, and then I run my bat file, which is start bat. Oh, it did work. Okay, cool. So what we've done here is we have added, or we have started up a client version of Diag. And this is like local server client. Okay. We haven't set up a deliberate server yet, which is what we'll do here in a second. Okay. But this is just for quick testing, just to make sure things work. And so I've jumped around a couple times and we have to say, well, we added some scripts for logging out when we jumped. How can we validate that it's working? And so, what was my profile? Okay, it's in my scripts. My local data. So I was wondering where is that stuff printing, right? If we're using script editor and Workbench, we'll see the custom message in the output section. We'll connect to Workbench here in a second and showcase that. If we're not, navigate to our profiles folder. The default is local app data DayZ. I'll go ahead and copy that without the quotes. And that dumps me into here. I'll sort by date. And I'll take the most recent one, script log. Here we go. Yay, my first mod, before super, after super. So I can tell that my scripts are printing. So up until now, it's taken us about an hour to build our first scripting mod. Pretty simple and trivial, but I know it works. I have a foundational template and my scripts are loading. I mean, in my opinion, it's a pretty big win for a new modder. Okay, let's take this to the next level. All right, let's make this function a little bit more like how a real server works, and how I would never use diag mode to prove my stuff works on a server without running on a server for like final testing. But I personally use diag mode constantly in my day-to-day development just because of its simplicity and its access to the tools inside of it. So like if it works in diag mode, like I'm pretty confident it'll work in the server, but you always got to test. Okay. So using our same principle of starting the server, using a script, we're going to make a script for starting the client. And so we're going to take this, and I'm going to go ahead and comment out the existing line. Paste this in here. Although, let's see, what can I actually reuse here? I'm going to bring this back. We already have the start, so I'll get rid of that. We have the D, we have the DayZ installation folder, get rid of that. We have the diag, we have my mods, we have file patching. So really all we need to do is add server, whoops. Add server and our config DZ. Okay. And if you're wondering, you'd be like, where do I get this server DZ CFG? Well, I normally just go to my server folder and grab whatever vanilla has. And in this case, again, just to showcase that it doesn't really matter where the files are, as long as you provide the path to them, I'm going to stick it in here. I'm going to rename it diag, just so I know it's there. Okay. Most people would dump it straight into their DayZ folder. I personally advise against that, just because after 6 months to a year, you'll come back and be like, what the heck does this file mean? And in my case, I have like 9 different servers that I spin up, so it makes sense to keep things separated. Okay. So we'll open in here. If we look inside of the DayZ diet, or excuse me, the server config, example name for the server, let's just name it trees scripting tutorial server. Password doesn't really matter. No one's going to be able to connect to it unless they're on your local LAN. But who knows who's on your network. Description of the server. No whitelist, max players. No more than 5 people are going to join. This is just to bound the game itself or the engine. Verify signatures. This right here is how you can run mods locally without having a buy sign. And so when mods don't provide their buy sign on the workshop, you can easily run your own server with verify signature 0 and run their mod. So all those server packs out there that are like, you can't run my mod, it's like, well, yes I can. I just turn the verify signatures to 0 and we're good. And even if you wanted to go as far as for same build, I wouldn't really recommend that. But yeah, voice over network quality, shard ID. This is a new thing that was brought about in Frostline. Disable personal light. Let's see what else. That's probably not needed. All right. And then the most important thing to note when you're making your config is the template name for the server, for the mission. Okay. If I go back to my installation, okay, you'll notice that it's missing the mission property right here. That's because the config provides it. So I'm going to remove that. Come back here and make sure you have the your mission name here. And the mission name is whatever this folder's name is inside of your MP missions folder. So if you named it Boogaloo Chorno, right, you would need to take this name and put it there, basically. Okay. So that would be the server. And I'm going to go ahead and just copy and paste this for the client. Copy, paste, start, client. Going to rename the name. And we're going to go in here and we're going to copy this. Oh, did I turn BattleEye off? I need to turn that's another thing. You'll need to turn BattleEye off. And you'll need to allow file patching. Did I? Okay, yeah. You'll need to add those. Just those two. Allow file patching to be 1 and BattleEye 0. Another thing. Okay. So then we're going to go ahead and copy and paste our client. And compare between the two. Okay, we have that. The installation folder. We have the diag mode. We have our mods. We have file patching. I'll get rid of server. I'll get rid of config because we don't need to config it. But we'll use these two properties to connect to our local server. And so for those that are watching and for the video, you don't really need to know these numbers or why they mean, but just for posterity, 127.0.0.1 is the default address for your home localhost network. That's just true for every computer out there, every network, unless you changed it. So like I could probably go to your house, ping that, and get some value. So like this is just your local host. All right. So let's go ahead and we can probably run it. One thing that this doesn't have that I would probably put here in the server is your profile. The profile is like the folder that all of the debug stuff gets saved to. You can name this whatever you want, but most of the time they have you name it profile or profile config. And in my opinion, that's a terrible name. This needs to be something like, you know, diag server test, something like that that's descriptive to this specific thing. If you'll notice mine, I have one per map. Profile for Sakal, my roleplay server, my nav mesh server, and then my bulldozer context, as well as the custom map that I'm making. So I think that it's a good way of separating things out, because if you have more than one, it's useful to have them separated. So let's go ahead and start our server. And then let's start our client. And so you would have noticed two things starting up. Oh, okay, my server definitely isn't working. Probably because the server config. Maybe, let's see. Oh, duh. So, common mistake, right? I deviated from the tutorial. I renamed the file. Okay. I renamed it to have an underscore diag, but I didn't update the script. So when it tried to start up, it was saying, I kind of closed it too fast, but if you pause the video back when you rewatch it, the error said it could not find the configuration file. And so that automatically triggered me to, oh, well, I renamed the file. So let's go ahead and redo that again. I apologize for blasting through that. I'm trying to not take as much time as I did last time. Okay. So then that makes me think I need to provide the full file path, since this script isn't inside of my DayZ folder. I'm gonna right click that, copy path. Okay, that gives me the full path. Let's see if that works. We'll need to put it in quotes. So this is probably one of the dangers of doing it the way I've shown, putting it in a different folder. Again, I'm just trying to showcase the fact that you can do it in a different way, but the tutorial on the workshop or this page here, it kind of assumes you're dumping all this stuff into your DayZ folder, which can get kind of cluttered if you're doing multiple versions. There we go. Okay, so now I can find it. That was the problem. I needed to provide the full path. And so if you notice here, reading some of these things as the server starts up, it's using the host name that I put in the config. It's reading my mission, which is churn nurse. Oh. It just broke. Maybe because I already had. Let's maybe I need to wipe. Hold on. Use my Churno server for a lot of things, so it might not be clean. And this is another problem sometimes with starting a server. It's just things break and you got to try and work through it. Oh no, what's wrong with my mission? Let's see, am I getting any logs? Should be getting logs in my DayZ server test. Okay, well let's not complicate it. We'll just bring everything. Copy. Paste. Copy. And then we'll paste it here. Who knows? I don't want to troubleshoot on the video here. One. Okay. Hey, Rag. What's up, Tyson? Come on. If it's breaking, it's probably something in the mission. It's in the init C that we set up, you know. So let's showing how repacking boosts performance. Let's uncomment this stuff and see if it works with this stuff here. Usually when things crash without an error like that, it's in the init C. Something's going on with whatever they posted there. That code might need to be updated. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So something, I'll take that as a note. That documentation needs to be updated. Worse when nothing crashes in init. Yeah, like basically until this. So main, this is what's called when things like are starting up. So like main is called right around here. This success game server init. Like main's usually called to get into there. And then when it says reading mission, it's getting into this part here where it's like creating the mission. The init C here is what kind of kicks it off. And then everything else gets loaded from there. I don't think so. Can you log 2 players in your local server from the same PC? Good question. Probably not on the same PC. Well, I mean, hold on. We can try that here. I mean, I don't think so because it's your Steam ID. I think you need to have 2 Steam IDs, mainly because you can't actually run the diag mode without a paid account. So at this point, my server started up and it's run and it's done all of its stuff, and we're going to connect to it with my client. And just for the video's sake, for troubleshooting, the reason why the server was breaking was because the initc was broken in the mission. Too many folders open. Cluttered environment. Yeah, you need 2 DayZ copies. Absolutely. There was a program that lets you emulate a second player, but it's technically against the Julia. So, oh, password protected, huh? That's right. Yeah, that's one of the hardest things about mods. Like my Infinity Gauntlet that I made, I technically didn't. Oh my god, I haven't been able to test it on a multiplayer server. But if you had 2 people on the same network in your house, they could definitely join. Some options. Okay. All right. So at this point, a lot of hard work has gone into starting a diag server. All right, you can see my player has joined. Then we have joined the server via our client, and we're running around here. And I don't have any admin tools, so I can't like. Oh wait, what was that? I guess I do have admin tools. I pressed home and it made me. I could fly. I'm not used to vanilla tools or whatever. But yeah, we have we've done that, and the whole reason I wanted to show you the client and server separation is because did I get rid of my profile? Why is it not here? I was half expecting my profile to be here so I could show you the logs, but I guess I'll just go to my app data. Suede, what's up? Oh, okay, cool. There's just too much stuff. Here we go. And as you can see, here are our jumping scripts that we added. So basically, we've proven that our mod works. And at this point, we can publish it to the workshop. I'm not going to show you how to publish it, mainly because it's as simple as, you know, clicking a couple buttons and filling out some fields. However, what we will do is load this mod into Workbench so we can see these happening while Workbench is open. All right, I think this is the part where it really all comes together. And then there is this DayZ Workbench. Here we go. Workbench scripted debugging. This is a big one. Do you have any other questions, Suede? Or Close the server. Put this in here. Okay. So the prerequisites of setting up Workbench here, basically have DayZ tools installed and the project drive. You have things unpacked. And if you notice, it will basically say, hey, you need to symbolically link some things to your DayZ installation folder. All right, so we can allow direct modification and hot loading of game scripts straight from the project drive to the game. Project drive is important because we've shorthanded that to P drive. Okay, so to do that, we have to create a symbolic link, like in the basic scripting pages and the examples we've gone over. So we'll go to the DayZ folder, blah, 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 and we are essentially linking DayZ scripts to the installation folder. Okay. So if I go to my DayZ folder, we don't see scripts anywhere in here. So we are going to add it, right? We'll want to copy this since they gave us a nice template. Paste it right here. Okay, we know our DayZ installation folder is here. I'm going to copy that and remove it. And I know that we've unpacked the scripts files, so I'm just going to leave that there. All right, we're going to copy that. I'm going to open my command prompt, Windows key, CMD, enter, then right click to paste. Okay, we've created a symbolic link. I've already gone over that several times now, so I don't think I need to talk about it anymore. And if I refresh, you can see that the scripts link is down here. Okay. Going back to our setup. Now we need to actually launch the Workbench. Okay, this is another hang up that will get people. If you haven't opened DayZ once, or you've extracted old game files over an existing extraction. So like, let's say you had 1.24 updates, DayZ files, and then DayZ themselves updated to 1.25, and then you re-extracted that, and they changed some script files. DayZ's to P type stuff script won't delete the existing files, whereas Wardog's extract tool will, and Macaro's, I'm not sure if it does or doesn't, but I personally will just delete the scripts folder before I extract, and that usually fixes any problems. Or you'll get an error that says like, Workbench can't find the DayZ installation folder, and you'll be like, what? Why? I know it's installed. I saw it was installed. I played, or I just had a fresh install, so I know it's there. And the answer is just open DayZ once. You got to set your registry, and so if you the Workbench usually only has those two issues. It's either your scripts are duplicated, and you need to get rid of the old, so just delete scripts, re-extract, or you've just installed DayZ and you haven't opened it once, and Workbench doesn't know where it is. There's a third if you use Macaro's, where the temp folder inside of your P drive will be considered a duplicate data source. Just to delete the temp folder. All right, it's no big deal. All right, so that's three. There's three options that could kind of hang you up in this case. But in my case, we've been able to open Workbench, and just kind of exploring some of these things here. The current directory, actually, if we go to the Workbench and options, we'll need to set our source folders. So for me, you've set your source directory. I set my source directory to P drive. You might need to set this up. I downloaded a custom theme. If you go to the Workbench channel in DayZ, there's the custom theme. I use that. I also limit the CPU because I don't think it needs to be more than 60. And I don't do anything here in the script editor, so then you click OK. That will require you to restart if that's a new install. And so I'm just going to reopen Workbench so it reloads everything. And after restarting, we'll be able to see like the source data. Oh, good call out, Tyson, with the backup. Sometimes if you don't want to delete your scripts folder before an extract, just rename it. And then you can compare the changes using something like WinMerge. So if you're on Windows, one thing you probably don't know is you have this thing called WinMerge. And it's pretty freaking crazy because you can right click anything, WinMerge. It opens up this thing and you can browse a second file or folder. You can even like compare folders. It's pretty crazy. And you compare them. It's pretty awesome. This just comes with all of your Windows stuff. So like if anyone ever asks me like, hey, what's the difference between these two files? I'll just do this. Or like, what's the difference between, you know, this folder and this folder? Like it'll tell you left, right comparison. You know, these are only here in the left. This is only here in the right. Really useful stuff. Also, if you notice, I'm inside my app data local. I have my Workbench RPT. If anything blows up or is wrong, like this will tell me. Very, very useful stuff. Okay, so it looks like our Workbench is open. WinMerge is not by default on Windows, is it? I don't know how I got it then. Maybe it's just a tool that I've had forever. Anyway, if you notice, since I've set my P drive to my source data, I have all of the source data. So DayZ, AI, you know, config CPP stuff. And then I have all their scripts here as well. Scripts. But if you notice, everything's kind of separate and squished. And this is just the Workbench itself. We want to go into editor. All right, we would go into script editor. But you notice here, none of my custom stuff, like my mod isn't here. If I were to, let's see. If I were to go into scripts for world entity man base, I would not see a modded player base in there. So for world entities, man base, player base. There's no modded player base. And so at this point, I can safely assume that my mod has not been loaded into Workbench. Okay. No way that it's there, because it would be right here given the file path. And so I'm going to go ahead and close this. And I'm gonna actually close Workbench completely because we have to do a little more work. In order to load mods into Workbench, we actually have to pipe in our mods, which is why I kind of got you introduced to having a batch file to begin with of starting your servers and clients, because in reality, you just need this stuff. And you're gonna be changing the mods all the time, and so you don't want it to be copy and pasting. So we're gonna grab this. Actually, I'm gonna rename this to start Workbench. Not bad. Okay. And I'm gonna paste this below the Workbench installation folder. Oh, where is Workbench installed actually? Is it in our DayZ folder? No, it will be in our DayZ tools. So if you, so actually another way to get to it is in here, DayZ tools, right click, properties, install files, then you can just browse to them. And then just from my experience, you know, clicking into folders, if you go into bin, you'll see all of the actual tools inside of DayZ tools. So these kind of folders correspond to stuff here. So looking for Workbench. Here's Workbench. Oh, here's Workbench app.exe. Great. I will grab this file path. And it's asking me to pipe in some mods, and so I'm going to replace that with the mods that I made. Okay. Get rid of that. Get rid of that. I'll open up a new terminal so I can just start Workbench. Go to P, see my test mod. And then start Workbench. So sometimes this will pop up and be like, hey, you don't have a required add-on. You might not have loaded the mod. If it complains about not loading DayZ data, it's because you didn't symlink your scripts folder, your DayZ scripts folder. Takes a second to scan them. Ah, here we go. Perfect. Let's go and open up our script editor. Okay, so let's go find our file. I know it was in 4World. Entities, man base. Ah, look at that, modded player base. And here's the code that I wrote. And so you can see, again, the power of symbolic linking, of just having a single source folder and then kind of spreading it around the world, and then they all kind of update the same source. This is useful because now I can press F7 to compile my code. And now things like, if I don't have a semicolon, you know, you get your linting. You get the things that an IDE would normally get you. And so I personally have been I've grown on the notion of using the script editor because it has autocomplete. It has a lot of that stuff that you're just wishing you had in other cases. And so this is benefit number one. But benefit number two is technically you can set these controls, these hotkeys, to like the start and stop commands. I haven't done that far yet, so we're just going to start diag mode. I'm going to start the server, start the client. And it's the reason why we're using diag mode is because that's the only exe that can connect to the workbench. Okay. And it's important to connect to the workbench because you want to be able to log things, hot swap, file patch, things like that to do quick development. Get this all set up. Oh, you can see that my script debugger has connected down here in the bottom right because Workbench is open, diag mode started up, the hooks have been sort of connected. Oh my gosh, I need to get rid of that password. Adding multiple mods is simply written as a server batch file like, yeah, mods are in the batch file, the mods are separated by a semicolon. So you'll notice that at the end of my mod, I put a semicolon. That's just good stewardship, right? Put a period at the end of a sentence, cap it off. So when you write, so Solomon has basically, I'm gonna go and copy and paste this real quick and put it in here. Solomon has basically said adding multiple mods is written simply as this, and writing it like this to me indicates that people are copy and pasting a mod into their DayZ folder. In my opinion, it makes far more sense to do something like if I'm going to use a mod from the workshop for my custom server, I would rather do something like this. Right, then like mod 2, I would get the full path, mainly because anytime you introduce this copy and pasting stuff, you're adding in human error. If you don't copy one of these mods correctly, you have essentially broken your server, and now troubleshooting is an assumption because you thought you copied them all. So in my opinion, you know, either reference the Steam or reference your build folders. Don't reference copied mods, because you can never be sure if you copied them correctly. Okay, we're here, we're in the game. We have Workbench, so you'll notice my output down here. As I jump, you can see the logs happening. So that might not be novel and all, but what if I wanted to change what's being logged? Let's something like print format. Something like player.getType, and then player dot, or I don't have a player. I just need to do getType. Sorry, getType, because we're already inside of the player base that's jumping, and then get position. Get the position of the thing that's jumping. I've saved it. Compile. Does it compile? Since it gives me the green light, then I can control F7, right? Recompile file on host, right? So recompile file on host is what allows the file patching to happen. So control F7. You see down here. Unknown type player base. What? That's weird. Doesn't matter. Still, sometimes the logging is a little weird. But if you notice, I was able to change the logging, and now it's why isn't wish it was centered on the bottom, but I've changed the log without having to restart the game. And that's the big thing for scripts, in my opinion. I can modify existing behavior, and it is just a quick control F7 away. And this doesn't work for modifying constructors. So if I had a constructor up here and I modified that, that wouldn't work. Also, if I were to add something like this, pretty sure this won't work either because it's new. It's a new function. And then control F7 to recompile it. Yeah, see, it doesn't, new things, you have to completely pull down the game and then re-push it up or restart it. So this is basically a workshop in a nutshell. Okay. Now, what if I wanted to do something with vanilla? So like another useful part of file patching is being able to change vanilla. Let's see, what can we do that is... we can actually see if we do it. Well, actually, hold on. Here, actually. We have that super call. Let's see how the order of our stuff matters. I think we can do this. Let's go and print that. Save. Recompile on host. Whoop. That definitely broke my game. All right, well, let's see. Can I still run it though? because again, the power of this is if I can modify vanilla code this simply, like when people ask, well, how do I know when something does something? Well, this is how you know. You would put prints in the area and you would observe its behavior. You would make a hypothesis like, I think this method is going to get called after mine. Okay, well, you can verify that by putting a print in there and then checking it out. Otherwise, you're kind of left to the folly of people to answer questions or, you know, not knowing. And so this is another one of those things where as a scripter, you're very much in tune with like digging in deep, putting little markers and diagnostics in places to understand what's going on, and then reconstructing the behavior. And since you have these tools like Workbench, the time to feedback loop or the time to like see the turnaround is pretty simple. Okay, cool. So you can do that, right? Like my first mod yay. I wish I could break this out. So my first mod yay before super calls, then vanilla stuff is called as proven by my print statement here with the long equal sign. Then, because super is called, that invocation finishes, then my prints continue to call by saying, hey, here I am, here's who I am, and here's my position, as well as another test function. Do you know if it's possible to remove the chill? Is that supposed to be inventory heat buff? Oh, vehicle? Move the in-vehicle heat buff you get and just get the game to keep the environmental temperature that is on the map instead. Well, let's actually look at that. It's a good question. Okay, so I have never dealt with vehicles, so this will be a good unknown for me. So like Control Shift F. Let's see. Vehicle heat. Is there anything there? Let's see. Temperature buff. Here's the environment. Okay, we'll keep that open for now. I think it's car, right? Class car. Car script. Extends car. Okay, does first off I checked, does car have any like variables in here that would maybe trigger heat? Oh, environment heat comfort override. Okay, so like to me, this is a big smoking gun, right? I read this and I say, okay, environment heat comfort override. It sounds close to giving me comfort or heat regardless of the environment. Okay, I'm gonna highlight this for now and scroll down just to make sure I didn't miss anything, because you want to read the whole thing first before you go back. None of those look good. Car door, car horn, brakes, force, selections, smokes, particles. Okay, and then we get down here. All right, so let's crawl this heat comfort override. 0. Dead end, it looks like. Nothing else uses it either. All right, well, that's unfortunate. Let's see, Tyson says something about post simulate. Conscious, dead. A radiator. I'm not seeing anything about temperature in here. Maybe is in vehicle. Ah, here we go. Okay, it's an environment. Right here. Determine heat comfort behavior. And I probably should have been talking through my thinking there because it was quiet for a bit. And just for like the video's sake, I was trying to find keywords that would clue me in on something that I was just trying to find where the heat comfort stuff is actually being added to the player, you know. And I first started with like temperature in the car. I then moved to like the vehicle or the player, and in this case, I always figured there's probably some logic in the game to consider if a player is in the vehicle to modify their comfort, which is why I put is inside or inside vehicle essentially. And I found this is inside vehicle, which brought me right here to determine heat comfort behavior, which looks like it is directly tied to car script. Is the engine on? Environment, heat comfort, behavior category. Engine on. And then in the environment function for set heat comfort directly, there's a condition here that says if you are in the car engine on, modify your heat comfort buffer. So the way I would fix this here, all right, so if I were to, if this was something on my server and they'd be like, Tree, we want to fix this, I would say, okay, cool. Let's go to our test mod. Okay. Test mod. I'm going to find where I'm going to actually put this file. World, class, environment. So world, new folder, classes, new folder, environment, new file, modded underscore environment.c. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and collapse everything so it's just easier to see. I'm going to scroll up to the main class. What class am I overriding? Oh, I'm overriding environment. So modded class environment. What function am I overriding? I'm overriding this thing. Okay. Override. And so at this point, the question is, well, I want to turn off this function, right? So then I would just take the guts of this condition, or sorry, first I would say, okay, so first off, we want to remove this function, right? When the engine's on, we want to remove that heat buffer. So I'm just going to completely remove the code that does the change, right? But I don't want to impact any other code that's being called, okay? So I'm going to check for my condition. Is the comfort category of this thing the engine? And if it is, we're going to do nothing. Otherwise, we're going to call super, okay? So you might say to yourself, Tree, why would you have a function that just does nothing? Well, I'm doing this to showcase that you can have positive and negative conditions for Booleans. So in this case, when the category is engine on, we were doing something. But in this case, when it is on, we want to not do it. Okay. So I'm going to negate this, and then I'm going to bring the functionality that we would have done up. Okay. Does it make sense? This can be kind of confusing because we're using a negative condition or the opposite to do something. So in this case, whenever it is not the car engine on, do the code. But if it is the car engine on, it's just going to pass through this. Could a return false also worked? Well, so this is a void function, so there's no return statement to begin with. We could have done something like, if we are equal to the car engine on, then return. We could just return. I consider this kind of dangerous, and I try not to have multiple return statements in a function, mainly because, again, it creates more overhead. I've essentially created 2 branching paths now for code, and it can be dangerous. Essentially, you now have to think, okay, well, this function now, I have a consideration of when we're on and when we're off. Like, but this would work. This would essentially, here, let's pack it up and show. All right, we'll put a print here just to showcase that it is working. Nullify heat buff in cars. And so the beauty of scripting is that there's many ways you can do this. And if you notice, Tyson suggested using the universal temperature source Lambda engine, and that is another valid way of doing it. And this comes down to personal preference of how much code you want to touch. Let's actually see what this does. So I look at this. It looks like a lot of things have their own universal temperature source. Shout out to the devs for adding this. This is pretty sweet stuff. This Lambda here is really cool. It essentially allows you to add a temperature source to any object and it not be like poorly performant. So let's come here. And these both are inheriting from a universal temperature source Lambda base implementation. So utilizing inheritance, we can dry items in vicinity. So here's where they've kind of abstracted out like get me all the objects around me and warm them up. In this case, dry them, or warm and cool them, or update in vicinity. So in this case, warm and cool items in vicinity. You could probably just turn off the update here for it. Right, you could probably just go like override void dry items in vicinity and just null it out. Honestly, like this would probably work as well. If you were to mod this as well, you would just do, this would be touching the Lambda. This is probably a smaller change than what I did. I basically blanketed in the entire environment, said any engines that's on, you can't give heat, which depending on what you're wanting, it could be exactly what you're wanting, or you could be like, maybe I want, the boats to give double heat, the hatchback to give none, the truck to give, 4 times, this other truck to give none. So like, it all depends on how deep of the simulation you want to do. Be careful when modifying vanilla files, because the script editor will like compile it and use it for diag, and so I've gotten myself into trouble by like deleting code like this and be like, why is my game not building? Well, it's because I've messed that stuff up. I realized I joined late in my dev environment. Are you using file patching in Visual Studio IDE? No, this is file patching in DayZ Workbench. We followed this guide here, and actually let me go and finish the guide. Sorry, I showcased the fact that we connected it to the debugger. Ooh, breakpoints. And this stuff down here well, so some people like seeing their code in the script editor in nice folders like this. I personally don't mind having my stuff directly in the files like this to DayZ. It's a preference. If you wanted to separate them out, you need to do some scripting to rename the prefixes. And since we're in Symlink world, you can prefix it however you want, right? So that's a more advanced thing, and I'm not going to cover it. I don't really support that that mode of workflow. You set it up earlier. Sir Paxter asked the question, what can you do with the hot compile? So just as a reminder for those, you can update existing functions. You cannot modify a constructor. You cannot add a constructor and change it and compile it. You cannot add a new function and use it. It has to be existing stuff. You can do player base. We were doing player base earlier. That's what this was. It crashed, but when I restarted the game, it showed up and my prints were showing. Basically, file patching is really just there for quick testing of existing stuff. Let's see. Another reason why Workbench is great is because of the GUI. If you ever wanted to look at the DayZ layout files. So most often paid mod is like a main menu mod, and in my opinion, it's one of the most easiest mods to do. And to add, like, it pains me to see that people pay for a main menu mod. Like, once you get Workbench set up, you're able to really look at anything you want. In this case, I lately have been looking at the inventory tooltip and then inspect layout views, right? And so if you wanted to change this, all you really need to do is copy and paste it and then hook into the UI on your own. Like, it's, for sake of this video going too long, I'll focus on that next week, which is UIs and GUIs and how to actually make your own main menu, because it's like 30 minutes worth of work. We're under the assumption that you couldn't do player base. Wardog says something about it not being possible. That's why I'm asking. I tried to change a print on jump and it said it compiled and wouldn't. It really depends on what you mean by compiled and couldn't. If we look at my logs, right, I get these warnings or errors that say unknown type player base, undefined function my print, but my code is still running. No, while the game's running, I can mod my own player base, or I can redo my own player base. I showed that, I proved that earlier. Not DayZ vanilla player base. That might have been the nuance there. Because here, I'll prove it to you. Start the client, start the server. Let's see. Brag, Tyson posted some code. Let me bring this over. That might help a little bit for the video. On engine start, if it has a universal temperature source, remove it. Yeah, this is good. This is a good stateful setup. Whereas the one I showed basically just literally turns off engine heat. Like, just the entire game. You can't use that constant anymore, which is kind of dangerous and destructive. But in some cases, that's what people want. Like, I don't want any engines making me hot. Okay. Not a problem. Okay, here we go. So we're in the game. And I'm going to jump. Right, I got my thing here, and I'm going to go ahead and modify this to just jibber-to-jook. Right, save it. Control F7 to remote compile. Right, it even complains, hey, there's no player-based type, but I could care less because when I come back in the game and then jump, right, my gobbledygook is there. So I just ignore whatever this is. I just assume it's just logs. What you can't do is, I can't do like this. Right, like making a new function and then trying to use it. Control F7. And I'll jump. And you see that new test isn't there. We have to recompile the full game to get the new stuff. I'm not entirely sure the mechanism behind this, and I wish you know the devs had the time to kind of tell us. It'd be really cool, but I assume it's something to do with templates and their version of generics. And since this doesn't technically exist as a member on the generic, at compile time, that doesn't get seen during a remote compile. And that could be potentially a, I don't know, security measure. Oh, here's another thing. Here's another reason why diag mode is awesome. If you press Windows Alt, you get this awesome little window. And there is a website for this. DayZ diag hotkeys. Very useful. Oh my gosh, this thing is invaluable. And you can also add plugins to this thing. So, very useful. But very often you'll see the people use the render for roadways, geometry. Right, like this is how you know how many verts are in things. Because you can actually like literally see it. So this is kind of what the server sees. What we're seeing here, it doesn't see the actual rendered stuff. So it kind of sees the game in a different light. Right. Fire geometry. What actually can be penetrated. Things like that. But yeah, I think that's that gets us to the end of our workshop sort of tutorial, in the sim linking, stuff like that. Any questions from the group? Any burning desires? While we wrap this up. Cool. Oh wow, it still works out here. I didn't realize. Make sure we don't leave any changes in here. Cool. Alrighty, well, I'll go ahead and close that down and get this video uploaded, and I hope you all have a good weekend. Thank you.